The kick came before the question did, which tells you everything about the man who threw it. I have stood the north gate of Harrogate Palace for 11 winters, and in that time I have been shouted at, filmed, poked, prayed to, mistaken for a wax figure, and once memorably offered a marriage proposal by a woman who believed my silence was shyness rather than orders. None of it moved me because none of it was meant to. The point of a man in a red tunic and a tall black cap is that he does not move. The tourists know this. It is why they come. They lean in close to the line, they hold their breath, they wait for the flicker that never arrives, and when it does not arrive they laugh and step back satisfied, because they have tested the pillar and the pillar held. Damok Vole did not come to be satisfied, he came to break something. I knew his face before I knew his name, the way you know a coming storm by the color of the light. He arrived at the forecourt a little after 10 in the morning on a bright, hard day in early autumn, the cobblestones still cool, the crowd thin but growing. He came with an entourage, that was the first thing. Ordinary visitors arrive as a family, a couple, a knot of friends passing a phone between them. This man arrived as a procession. 2 younger men flanked him carrying gym bags with a logo stitched on the side, a woman with a camera the size of a loaf of bread, and a 5th who walked backward in front of him filming his face as though the face itself were the destination. They wore matching black jackets with a snarling animal embroidered over the heart. Vole wore his open, the way a man wears a coat he intends to be admired in and never wants to button. He was built the way a bell is built, broad and heavy through the shoulders, narrow lower down, everything about him arranged to swing and to ring. His head was shaved to a shine. His hands, when he gestured, were the hands of a man who has spent 30 years teaching other hands what they can do. He was somewhere past 40 and unwilling to admit it, and he moved through the widening crowd with the particular ease of a person who has never in his adult life had to wonder whether a room would make space for him. They set up across the line from my box the way a film crew sets up angles discussed, the light checked, the woman with the loaf-sized camera walking a slow half-circle to find where the palace stone would sit best behind him. I heard fragments. Get the hat in frame. No, lower so it looks like he's looking down at him. Are we live? And then Vole turned to face me, and I understood that I was not a man to him at all. I was a backdrop that had been advertised as difficult. So this is the famous one, he said. He spoke to the camera, not to me. His accent was flattened and traveled, a voice that had done its business in a dozen countries and kept the corners off. The guard who never moves. The statue. He spread his arms wide, taking in my box, my rifle, my stillness, the whole apparatus of the palace behind me. People pay to come look at a man standing still, and they tell me I'm the show. Behind him, the 2 younger men laughed on cue. The crowd, sensing entertainment, began to thicken. Phones came up along the line like reeds turning toward the sun. I looked forward. I always look forward. There is a fixed point I hold, a particular seam in the mortar of the far wall, chosen my first week and kept ever since, and I put my eyes on it and let the world happen at the edges. This is not a trick and it is not empty. Holding a point is a discipline you build the way you build a callus, and inside that discipline there is more room to think than people imagine. I was thinking at that moment that this one would need watching. The loud ones who want a reaction are harmless. It is the ones who have come with a plan who require the eyes at the edges to work harder. Watch this, Vole told the camera. He stepped up to the low chain that separated the public from my box, not over it, not yet, but close enough that I could smell the mint of whatever he chewed. I've fought champions on 5 continents. I've put men twice this one's size on the floor in front of 10,000 people, and they want me to believe he's the hard man of this city. He laughed, a big performed laugh with nothing behind the teeth. Let's find out how hard. I want to be precise about what I was and was not, standing there, because the whole of what followed turns on it, and because a great deal of nonsense has since been said by people who were not present and by some who were and should know better. I was a ceremonial guardsman of the king's household. That was true, and it was the whole of what the crowd could see. The red tunic, the tall cap of dark fur, the white gloves, the medals I was entitled to, and the rifle I carried and did not on that gate load. To the eye, I was exactly what Vole named me, a man paid to stand still and be photographed. That is a real job and an honorable one, and I have never been ashamed of it. The stillness is not a costume worn over emptiness. It is the outside of something. What the crowd could not see, and what Damon Vole in all his traveled cleverness had not troubled to find out, was the inside. But I am getting ahead. Let me stay where I was in the box, eyes on the seam, a loud man on the far side of a chain deciding whether to make his morning by unmaking mine. He did not kick me then. He was too good a showman to waste the moment on an empty crowd. He worked the line first. He walked its length with the camera trailing him, telling the tourists what they were about to see, warming them the way a man warms an audience before the real act. You want to know what discipline is? Real discipline. It's not standing still while nothing happens. Anybody can stand still while nothing happens. Discipline is standing still while something does asterisk. He grinned. We'll test it. For science. The tourists laughed, uneasy, delighted, the specific laugh of people who suspect they are about to watch something they should probably stop and have decided instead to film. My relief was due at 11. I remember calculating that 40 minutes, and calculating too that 40 minutes is a long time to be a target for a man who has decided you are one. I remember hoping the sergeant would come early, and knowing he would not, and settling deeper into the seam on the wall. There is a version of my job that is nothing but the management of the next 40 minutes, again and again, forever. I have gotten good at it. His name reached me in pieces from the crowd. A teenager near the front had recognized him and was narrating for a friend on the phone. It's Vole, Damon Vole. The kickboxer, the one with the gym chain, he's got like 4 million followers. The friend on the phone must have doubted because the teenager insisted. No, I swear it's him, he's about to fight the guard. Which was not true, there would be no fight. A fight requires two, but I understood how it looked, and I understood that 4 million people, or some fraction of them, were about to be told a story with me at the center of it. This did not trouble me. I have been the center of other people's stories before and survived it. The trouble, if it came, would be closer than 4 million people. The trouble would be a boot. It came at 10:40. He had been circling, building, and the crowd had built with him, and at some point the performer in him decided the room was hot enough. He turned from the camera to me, and something in his face changed. The grin stayed, but the eyes above it went flat and working. And I knew, the way you know from the shift of weight and the drop of the chin, that the next thing off him would not be words. Let's see the famous discipline, Damon Vole said, and stepped over the chain and kicked me. I will describe it honestly, because I owe the truth to the men who have kicked at things worth kicking. It was a good kick. It was a real kick, thrown by a man who has thrown 10,000 of them and been paid handsomely for the last several thousand. A roundhouse low to the outside of my left thigh, the fighter's kick, the one meant to dead a leg and drop a man to one knee so the crowd can see him drop. He did not throw it at my head. Even in his arrogance, he had a professional's instinct for the line he could cross and still call it a demonstration. He threw it at the meat of the leg, hard, snapping the shin through the target the way you are taught, and it landed with a sound like a bat meeting a heavy bag, a flat wet whump that the microphones caught and that has been played, I am told, a very great number of times. It hurt, I will not pretend it did not hurt. A kick like that from a man like that would drop most people, and it did not drop me only because I had spent a portion of my life in places where being dropped was the difference between two very different mornings, and the body remembers those places even when the mind has agreed to stand still in a red coat and forget them. I did not move. I want to be careful here because I did not move is the thing the crowd saw and cheered, and it is true, and it is also not the interesting part. Not moving was not the achievement. Not moving is easy when the alternative is unthinkable and the discipline is deep. The achievement, if there was one, was the decision underneath the not moving. The decision I made in the half-second the pain arrived, which was that this man had not yet earned a response, and that the response, when it came, would not be the one he wanted. Because there is a thing men like Damok Vole never understand about men like me, and it is this: the reaction is the reward. He kicked me to buy a reaction. A flinch, a stumble, a break in the line, a face turned toward him in anger or shock, that was the coin he came for. And the surest way to leave a man like that unpaid is to give him nothing. So I gave him nothing. I put my eyes back on the seam in the far wall, and I let the leg burn, and I stood the way the coat and the cap and 11 winters had taught me to stand. And around me the crowd made a noise I had not heard before, not the delighted gasp of a test passed, but something lower and angrier, a sound with an edge on it, the sound of 100 people who had come to be entertained, and discovered instead that they were watching a man be struck. Vole heard it too, and here is the second thing men like him never understand. A crowd will lend you its laughter for a long time, but it takes the laughter back all at once. He had misread the room. He thought the kick was the climax. It was only the turn. "Come on," he said, and there was for the first time a thread of something less than certainty in his voice. He stepped back, bouncing on his toes, hands loose, playing to a crowd that had stopped playing back. "Come on, hard man, that's the discipline. Standing there like a coat rack while I did your leg. Where's the famous guard now?" He looked to his entourage for the laugh, and the 2 younger men gave it to him, but it came a half-beat late and a half-measure quiet, and he heard that too. I said nothing. There is nothing a man in my position may say, and there is nothing I wish to say. My orders on that gate are old and simple, and they do not bend for a boot. I do not leave my post. I do not engage the public. I do not surrender the line. Everything I am permitted to do I had already done, which was to hold. So I held. But I will tell you what I was doing behind the seam in the wall, because the mind does not go still just because the body has. I was doing what I was trained a long time ago to do, in a life the crowd knew nothing of and Vole had not imagined. I was reading him, the way he'd stepped in. The chamber of the hip, the drop of the lead hand as he committed a habit, a real one, the small dropped guard that a fighter builds over years of never being punished for it because the men across from him were always slower. The plant of his weight, the favored side, the tell before the kick, a flicker in the shoulder, a fifth of a second before the leg. I catalogued him the way I had once been paid to catalog men I might have to stand in front of for reasons far less forgiving than a tourist's camera. I did it without deciding to. It is not a skill you turn off. It is a way of seeing that stays in the eyes after everything else has been handed back to the quartermaster. I did not intend to use any of it. Understand that. In the box on the gate, there is no scenario in which I use it. A ceremonial guardsman does not spar with the public. If Damok Vole had kicked me once and grown bored and moved on, I would have taken my bruise to the sergeant at 11, filed the paper, iced the leg, and stood the same gate the next morning, and the loaf-sized camera would have gone home with a video of a coat rack, and that would have been the whole of it. But he did not grow bored. That was his mistake, and it was the kind of mistake his whole life had trained him to make. Damok Vole had never once, in 30 years, walked away from a thing he had decided to break. It was the engine of him. It had made him rich and it had made him famous, and it was, that morning, about to make him something else. "All right," he said, and the showman came back over his face like a mask snapped on. He turned to the camera, wide grin, arms out. "So the palace won't let him fight, fine. Rules." He said the word rules the way small men say it, as a thing that binds the weak. "But everybody watching this, everybody, I want you to see what a joke it is. This is the country's finest. This is the guard they put in front of the king." He walked the line again, gathering it. "I'll tell you what, I'm here 3 days. I'm doing a seminar across the river. And I put it to your palace, your king, your whole shining institution." He swept his arm at the great facade behind me. "Give me one of your guards. In a ring. Rules, referee, whatever you like. Let's find out if the statue can fight, because I don't think he can. I think he's a coat and a hat and a leg I can kick all day." The crowd did not cheer. That more than anything should have warned him. But Damon Vole had spent so long being cheered that he had forgotten the sound of not being cheered, and he mistook the silence for awe. He kicked me a second time before he left. This one was pettier, a shove of a kick, low and quick, more insult than technique, thrown as a punctuation mark on his way back over the chain. It landed on the same thigh, on the bruise the first had already laid down, and this time the pain had a bright white edge to it. And still I did not move, and this time the not moving cost more, and this time, I will be honest, a small, old, banked thing in the center of me turned over once in its sleep and opened one eye. I put it back down. I had spent years learning to put it back down. But I felt it wake, and I knew that some part of the morning had changed that could not be changed back. Then Damon Vole gathered his procession, and his loaf-sized camera and his 4 million followers, and he went off across the river to his seminar, well pleased, to tell the world about the statue that could not fight. He truly never expected what happened next, neither, if I am honest, did I. The video was everywhere by noon. I did not see it. I was, by noon, in the small room off the guardroom with my trousers around my ankles, and the sergeant crouched at my thigh making the low, disapproving noise sergeants make. The bruise had come up fast and ugly, a spreading country of it, purple going to black at the center where the second kick had doubled the first. Sergeant Office Hans, a square, gray, unhurried man who had stood the same gates 20 years before me and had a face like a closed ledger, pressed 2 fingers to the edge of it and watched my face and found nothing there, because I was doing what I do. "You didn't move," he said. It was not a question. He'd have heard by then, everyone had. "No, Sergeant." "Course you didn't." He straightened, knees cracking, and looked at me for a long moment with the particular expression he saved for the small number of things that surprised him, which after 20 years was a very small number indeed. "You want to tell me who you were before you came to me, Corporal Wren?" I said nothing. This was an old conversation between us, older than the words. Hans had suspected for years that I had a life before the gate that did not fit the shape of a man who took a gate. He had never asked outright, because that is not how it is done, and I had never told, because that is not how it is done either. There are men in the household who carry quiet histories, and the household has the good grace not to make them speak. My file said what it needed to say and no more. The rest lived where it lived. "Ice it," Hunt said finally. "Both watches off. I'll put Talwin on the gate." "I'm fit for the gate, Sergeant." "You're fit for ice and a chair, Wren, and that's an order, so save your breath." He gathered up the kit. At the door he stopped. "You've seen it then, the clip?" "No, Sergeant." He looked at me a moment longer. "Don't," he said, which from Hans was a whole sermon, and he went out. Of course I saw it. There is no man alive who is the subject of a thing 4 million people are watching who does not, in the end, watch it. I saw it that evening in the dark of my quarters on the small screen of my own phone, with the sound off first and then, when I could not stop myself, on. It is a strange thing to watch yourself be struck. Stranger still to watch a stranger become, in the space of 30 seconds of footage, the most hated man in the country. Because that is what had happened while I sat with ice on my leg. Damon Vole had posted the clip himself, of course he had. It was his triumph, his proof, cut and captioned and scored to something with a heavy drum. The statue that can't fight, asterisk, and he had waited for the adulation, and the adulation had not come. What came instead was the other thing. The comments, when I finally let myself read them, were a single sound made by a great many mouths. "Coward. Bully. He's not allowed to move, you gutless. That man is standing for something you'll never understand. Look at his face. Look how still he is. That's a better man than you'll ever be." They did not know the half of it. They thought they were defending a symbol, the still guard, the discipline, the country's dignity assaulted by a loud foreign fist. They were defending a coat and a hat and an idea. They had no notion at all of what actually stood inside the coat, and neither did Damick Vole, and neither, that first night, did they need to. The idea was enough. The country closed around the idea the way a body closes around a splinter, and by morning the splinter had a name, Vole's name, and the whole apparatus of public feeling had turned to the single project of forcing it out. The palace said nothing. That is the palace's genius and its discipline. It is a guardsman scaled to the size of a nation. It stood at its post and held its point on the far wall and let the storm break at the edges. There was no statement, no condemnation, no answer to Vole's ringing challenge across the river. The silence infuriated him. I could see it happening in real time over the next 2 days in the escalating videos he posted, each one louder than the last. Where's the palace? Where's the king? I called them out, I called out their best man, and what do I get? Silence. You know why? Because they know. They know he can't fight. They know I'm right. He had built, without meaning to, a trap for himself, and he was decorating it as he climbed inside. Every video demanding the palace answer him made the eventual answer, whatever it would be, larger. And there would be an answer. I knew that before anyone told me because I knew the household, and I knew that a thing had been touched that the household does not leave untouched. Not my leg was nothing, a bruise. It would yellow and fade and be forgotten. What had been touched was the line, the gate, the idea that a man may cross a chain into the king's forecourt and lay hands or feet on the king's guard and post it for 4 million people and suffer nothing. That could not stand, and everyone in the palace from the sergeant to the sovereign knew it could not stand. And the only question, the question that occupied the quiet rooms above the guardroom for 2 full days while I sat with ice on my leg and told no one what I had seen in the drop of Damick Vole's lead hand, was what the answer would be and who would carry it. On the 3rd morning, the sergeant came for me himself. Get dressed, Wren, proper, not the ceremonials, the number 2s, you're wanted upstairs. Upstairs in the guardroom does not mean a floor. It means a direction, and the direction is toward the part of the palace where the decisions live. I have been upstairs exactly twice in 11 years, once to be commended and once to be measured for the ceremonials, which tells you the 2 reasons a corporal is sent up. This was a 3rd reason, and I did not know its name yet, and I dressed carefully and slowly and let the not knowing sit where the pain had been. Hince walked me up himself, which was itself a thing. Through the guardroom, up the worn stone stair, along a corridor that changed under our feet from flagstone to carpet, from bare wall to portrait, the temperature of the place rising as we went, growing quieter and warmer and older. He did not speak until we reached a tall, pale door with a man beside it. I did not know plainclothes, still, with the specific stillness I recognized, the stillness of my other life. That man looked at me, and I looked at him, and something passed between us that neither the sergeant nor anyone else in that corridor could have read, a flat professional acknowledgement, one animal recognizing the make of another. He knows you're coming, Hince said. He put his square hand on my shoulder, which he had never done, not once in 11 years. Whatever they ask you in there, Wren. He stopped. He was not a man of many words, and he had reached the end of the ones he had. Just tell them the truth, even the parts you've been sitting on. This is the room for it. Then the pale door opened, and I went in to meet the men who were going to decide what happened to Damick Vole, and to learn that they already knew far more about me than the sergeant did. The room was smaller than I expected and older than the corridor. A long table of dark wood, a window giving onto an inner court, a fire laid but unlit, and 3 men, and I knew 2 of them by sight the way every man in the household knows them, and one of them not at all. At the head sat Crown Prince Rowan. He was younger than his portraits let on. The portraits give him his father's gravity, and in person the gravity was there, but it sat over something quicker, a mind that moved and let you see it move. He had a soldier's shoulders and a scholar's eyes, and he was, that morning, plainly angry in the controlled way that men in his position are permitted to be angry, which is to say not at all in the face, and entirely in the stillness of the hands. To his right sat a man in the dark suit of the household's own security, master of the guard. I would learn, the officer who sat above even Sergeant Hintz's sergeants, a lean gray man named Corvin, whose name I had heard spoken in the guardroom the way you speak of weather that has not yet arrived. And to the prince's left sat the man I did not know, older, broad, with a face like a coast that has taken a great deal of sea. He wore no uniform. He wore a good plain coat and a signet ring and an expression of frank, unhurried interest, and he was looking at me, only at me, with the particular attention of a man reading a document he had written himself a long time ago and half forgotten. "Corporal Wren," the prince said, "sit." I sat. "You know why you're here. A man kicked me on the north gate, Your Highness, and filmed it. A man assaulted a guardsman of my father's household on crown ground and has spent 3 days daring us to answer." The prince's voice did not rise. "That is why you're here. There is also a second reason, and I'll come to it, but I want the first one clear first, because the second one changes it, and I don't want the change to muddy the first." He leaned forward slightly. "You did nothing wrong. I want that said out loud in this room before anything else is. You held your post under provocation that would have broken most men, and you gave that man precisely nothing, and in doing so you did more for this household in 30 seconds than a year of ceremony. The country saw it. The country is not confused about who was in the right. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Your Highness." "Good, because what we're about to discuss might make you feel otherwise, and I need you to carry that first fact into it. Now," he sat back. He glanced once at the broad man on his left, and something in the glance handed the room over. "This is a colleague. He'll not give you a name today, and you won't ask for one, and if you recognize him you'll keep that off your face, which I'm told you're capable of." A thin ghost of something that was not quite a smile. "He has read your file. Your whole file, Corporal, not the one Sergeant Hintz has, the one before it." And there it was. 11 years of the gate, and in a single sentence the wall I had built between the two halves of my life came down as neatly as a demolished chimney, brick by brick, in a warm, quiet room 3 floors above the post where I had spent those years being nobody. The broad man spoke for the first time. His voice was low and worn smooth, a voice used to being obeyed without ever needing to raise itself. "You were 11 years in the Sable Company," he said. It was not a question. The Sable Company is not a thing one says aloud in daylight, and hearing it said aloud in daylight was like hearing a word from a dream spoken by a waking stranger. Selection at 22. You washed out of nothing. You were, for 6 of those years, an instructor at the depot, close quarters, hand to hand, the syllabus the rest of them learned from. Men who are now doing work I won't describe learned to fight from you, Corporal. Then there was the matter in the hill country, which we will also not describe, and after which you asked to be released, and were, and disappeared into a red coat on a north gate, where you have stood for 11 years teaching no one anything and asking nothing of anyone. He tilted his head. "I have wondered about you for a long time. I confess, I did not expect to meet you over a kickboxer." I said nothing. The prince had told me to tell the truth, even the parts I had been sitting on, but no one had asked me a question yet, and I have never in my life volunteered a word about the Sable Company, and I found I could not begin now even in that room. The broad man watched me not answer and seemed, if anything, pleased by it. "He won't confirm it," the broad man said to the prince mildly. "He shouldn't. It's the correct instinct, and I'd think less of him if he'd nodded along. But it's true all the same, and it's the reason this problem is different from the problem you thought you had." He turned back to me. "You understand what you're carrying, Corporal. You're not a ceremonial guardsman who was unlucky enough to be kicked. You're one of perhaps 40 living men who could have taken that kick, taken the leg entirely off him for it, and been home for lunch. And you stood there and let him do it twice and gave him nothing." He nodded slowly. "That's the part that interests me. Any fool can hit back. You didn't asterisk. Why?" It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer, and it was the first thing anyone had asked me that I could answer without betraying the company. Because he wanted me to, sir. The broad man's eyes crinkled. Go on. A man like that kicks to buy a reaction. It's the only thing he came for. The kick isn't the point is what the kick makes you do. If I move, he's won, whatever happens after. He's proven the statue's a man like any other, and that's all he wants, and he'll take a bruise of his own for it gladly because the video's the same either way. I found, having started, that the words came. The only way to leave a man like that with nothing is to give him nothing. My orders say hold the post. My training, the other training, says the same thing, said differently. Never fight the fight your enemy chose, so I didn't. He chose a brawl on my gate. I declined to have one. I paused. That's not discipline as a costume, sir. That is the discipline. It's the same discipline both halves of my life were teaching. That's why I could stand it. Most tourists who lean on the line, I hold because it's the job. That morning I held because it was the right move, and the job just happened to agree. The room was quiet. The prince and the gray master of the guard were both looking at the broad man, and the broad man was looking at me. And after a moment he sat back and let out a slow breath through his nose that might, in a less composed man, have been a laugh. There, he said to the prince, that's your answer to whether he can be trusted with the thing you're about to ask him. A man who understands asterisk that won't lose his head in a ring in front of a nation. He spread one hand on the table. Ask him. The prince leaned forward again, and now I understood that everything before had been the ground being cleared, and here at last was the building they meant to raise on it. Damok Vole has issued a public challenge, Rowan said, repeatedly loudly, to 4.5 million people and counting. He has dared this household to put one of its guards in a ring with him under a referee and rules, and he has told the world that our silence is proof the guard can't fight. My instinct, my father's instinct, is that the crown does not brawl. We do not answer a lout by climbing into his ring. We arrest him, we deport him, we let the law close over him, and we say nothing, and that is dignity, and dignity is usually right. He paused. But my father and I have talked for 2 days, and we have come to think that this once, dignity is exactly wrong, because Vole hasn't insulted a man. He's insulted an idea, the idea that the guard on the gate is a hollow ornament, a coat and a hat, a country too soft to defend its own front step. And that idea, if it's left to stand because we were too proud to answer it, does more damage than any bruise. Half the world already half believes it. He spent 3 days making them believe it harder. He let that sit. So we are considering, Corporal, it is not decided, and it will not be decided without your word accepting his challenge, under conditions of our choosing. A sanctioned exhibition, a proper referee, medical staff, rules that make it a test of skill and not a fight to harm. Him and 1 guardsman, and the guardsman we are considering is the one he chose himself. You. I did not answer at once. Across the table the broad man watched me, and I understood that he, of all of them, knew exactly what he was asking, and that he had asked it deliberately, and that the whole shape of the meeting, the cleared ground, the file, the single question, why didn't you, had been built to find out whether I was still the man who could do the thing, and more importantly, whether I was still the man who could be trusted to do it correctly. Because there is a great difference between a man who can win and a man who can win the right way, and the second man is much rarer, and the second man was the one the household needed if it was going to climb into Damok Vole's ring at all. May I speak plainly, Your Highness, I said. I'd be disappointed otherwise. If you put me in a ring with that man, I will beat him. I want that clear before you decide anything, because everything you decide has to be built on it being true. It won't be close. He is a good fighter and a famous one, and he has beaten better men than he thinks I am. But he has never once in his life fought a man who was trained to end fights rather than win them. And there is a difference, and the difference is the whole of what the other half of my life was. I could hurt him badly. I could hurt him in a way the crowd would love and you would regret by morning, because it would make him a victim and make us the brutes, and it would prove his point about us instead of disproving it. I met the prince's eyes. So if I'm to do this, it can't be a beating. It has to be a lesson. He has to lose so completely and so gently that even he can see there was never a moment he could have won, and walk out of that ring on his own 2 feet, unbroken, with nothing to be angry about except the truth. That's harder than hurting him. Much harder. But it's the only version of this that helps you instead of him. The silence after that was different from the silences before it. The broad man was the one who broke it. He looked at the prince, and this time he did smile, a slow, weathered thing. He just told you how to run the whole operation, he said, in one breath, better than I would have. He turned to me. You'll do it then. If His Highness orders it. Not otherwise. I'm not going to order it, the prince said. That's the point I've been trying to reach this whole time. This can't be an order, Corporal, because if it's an order and it goes wrong, it's the crown's fault, and if it's an order and it goes right, it's still the crown made a man fight for its pride, and neither of those is a thing I'll do to you. So I'm going to ask you, as a man, not as a corporal, knowing everything you've just told us. He folded his hands. Will you stand in that ring for us? I thought about the gate, 11 winters of it, the seam in the far wall, the particular piece of being nobody, which I had chosen on purpose, which I had built as carefully as any wall after a life in which I had been somebody in ways that cost more than they were worth. I thought about the banked thing in the center of me that had opened one eye when the second kick landed on the bruise, and how I had put it back down, and how I did not much want to wake it, and how, if I did this, I would have to. And I thought about the comments under the video. That man is standing for something you'll never understand. They were defending an idea, and the idea was true, truer than they knew, and Damok Vol was about to be allowed to make the whole world believe it was hollow, and I was, of the 40 living men who could answer him, the only one wearing the coat. Yes, Your Highness, I said, I'll stand for you, on my conditions, which are your conditions because they're the same conditions. He walks out whole. He loses so plainly he can't argue it. And no one, not him, not the crowd, not the 4 million, ever learns the other half of my file. It ends with a ceremonial guardsman who could fight after all, not with the company. The company stays where it lives. The broad man inclined his head once, the way one professional accepts a term from another. That last one, he said, I'd have insisted on myself. Agreed. Then it's agreed, said the prince, and stood, and the room stood with him. Corvin will handle the conditions with Vol's people. It won't be easy. He'll want it his way, his ring, his rules, and he'll smell a trap, which is fine because there is one, only not the kind he'll be looking for. He came around the table and stopped in front of me close, and for a moment the prince and the gravity and the anger all set themselves aside, and it was just a man looking at another man he had asked a hard thing of. Thank you, he said quietly. Whatever happens in that ring. You could have let us arrest him and gone back to your gate, and no one would have thought less of you. Instead, you're going to walk into a thing that could cost you the quiet you built. I know what that quiet is worth to a man who's earned it. I won't forget you spent it for us. I did not know what to say to that, so I said the only true thing. It's the job, Your Highness. No, he said. It stopped being the job the moment I asked instead of ordered, but I'll let you keep it there if it's where you're comfortable. And he stepped back, and it was over, and Sergeant Hintz took me down the worn stair to the guardroom and the flagstone and the bruised leg and the ordinary world. And behind me, 3 floors up, the machinery began to turn that would put Damok Vol in a ring with the one man in the country he should never have kicked. The negotiation took 9 days, and I was told about it in pieces, because the men who conducted it were skilled and I was, for those 9 days, doing the other thing. The thing no one saw, which mattered more than any of the public wrangling and which I will come to. Vol did not want it. That was the first surprise, and it should not have been. A man who spends 3 days daring an institution to fight him is not, it turns out, entirely prepared for the institution to say yes. When the master of the guard's people made the first quiet approach, no cameras, a lawyer and a fight sport official, a proposal on plain paper, Vol's first instinct was suspicion, and his second was to try to make it his. He wanted his own ring, his own city across the river, his own referee, his own rules, his own doctor, his own cameras. He wanted, in short, to fight the palace on his home ground with his thumb on every scale, and he could not understand why the palace kept, mildly and immovably, saying no. The palace said no the way I stand a gate, not with heat, with position. Corvin's people had one lever and they used it perfectly. Vol had made the challenge public to millions, and the moment the palace accepted it publicly, the pressure reversed. Now he was the one who had to fight or be called a coward, and the whole apparatus of feeling he had built to trap the palace closed instead around him. Every condition he tried to dictate, the palace answered with a soft public willingness and a private immovability until it began to look, to his own 4 million, as though he were the one making excuses. The palace has agreed. The palace has agreed to everything reasonable. Why is Vol stalling? He could not bear it. Being called a coward was the one thing his whole life could not survive. So, condition by condition, he gave ground, and the ground he gave was exactly the ground the palace had meant for him to give. The conditions that survived were these. It would be an exhibition, not a fight. That word mattered, legally and otherwise. A single round of fixed length. A neutral venue, not his city across the river, not the palace, but a great hall in the capital used for tournaments, some thousands in the seats and the rest on their screens. A referee agreed by both sides, a former champion too old and too respected to be bought. Full medical staff at ringside, empowered to stop the thing at any instant. And the rule Vol's people fought hardest and lost hardest on. It would be scored on control and skill, points for dominance and technique, and taken off for anything that crossed from contest into harm. A man could win by clearly outclassing the other without ever landing a blow that hurt him. Vol hated that rule. Vol lived by the other kind. But by the time he understood how much he hated it, he had already agreed to too much else to walk, and the trap had a lid. There was one more condition, and it was mine, and Corvin carried it as though it were the palace's, which by then it was. I would not be named. I would enter the ring as *A guardsman of the king's household and nothing more. No history, no rank beyond corporal, no whisper of the file that lived under my file. To the world I would be exactly what Vol had called me, the statue, the coat and the hat, right up until the moment I was not. That was not vanity. It was the whole strategy. The lesson the household needed taught was not the palace happens to employ one retired killer. It was the man on the gate, the ordinary guardsman, the ornament you sneered at. He was never hollow. If they knew what I had been, the lesson would be about me. Kept secret, the lesson would be about the coat. And the coat was what Vol had insulted, and the coat was what had to be answered. Vol agreed to all of it, on the 9th day, in a signed document and a triumphant video, because he had convinced himself of a thing men like him always convince themselves of at exactly the wrong moment. He had decided the palace's willingness was desperation. He read the conditions, the control scoring, the single round, the refusal to let him make it a war as the palace protecting a man who could not survive a real fight. They know he can't fight, he told his 4 million. Look at all the rules they need. But rules or no rules, you can't hide a man who can't fight from a man who can. In one round I'll show you the statue's hollow. He believed it. That is the thing to hold on to through everything that followed. Right up to the ropes, Damick Vol believed, with the whole force of a life that had never once been wrong about a fight, that he was walking in to expose a fraud. He had no idea he was the fraud, that the rules he read as a cage around me were a cage around him, that the household had not agreed to protect its guardsmen, but to unleash him with a leash so short and so subtle that the crowd would see only a lesson and never a beating. He had spent 9 days winning concessions, and every concession had walked him further into the one room in the world he should have run from. Now the thing no one saw. For those 9 days, and the 12 after them before the date, I trained. Not at the depot. The depot was a door I had closed, and the broad man had agreed it would stay closed. There would be no return to the company even to prepare to defend the coat. I trained quietly in a bare room. The household found me, with 2 men the broad man sent, whose names I did not ask and who did not ask mine. They were of my kind. That was plain in the first 10 minutes, the way it is always plain in the economy of how they moved and the flatness of how they watched. They had been told what I was and what I was for, and they set about the work without ceremony. The first thing they did was find out whether I was still there. 11 years is a long time to stand still. The body forgets faster than the mind believes it does. On the first morning in the bare room, one of them, the younger, a rangy, quiet man I came to think of as the left, because he favored it, put on the pads and asked me, without a word, only with the pads themselves, to show him what was left. And for the first 3 minutes there was very little. My timing was a beat slow. My distance, the thing I had once owned absolutely, the invisible science of exactly how far away a man is, and what he can and cannot reach across that gap, my distance had grown polite. 11 years of a world in which no one meant me harm had taught my body to expect none, and it flinched at the edges and reached where it should have waited and waited where it should have moved. The left lowered the pads and looked at me and said the only sentence he said all morning, "It's in there. It's just under 11 years of coat," and we began to dig it out. I will not pretend those days were nothing. There was pain in them, the honest pain of a body remembering, and a morning in the second week when I could not close my left hand around a cup and sat looking at it for a while in the gray light. But the strange thing, the thing that surprised even the 2 men sent to rebuild me, was how quickly it came back once it started, because it had never really left. It had only been set down. The company teaches you a way of moving that becomes, if you learn it as young and as deep as I did, not a skill you have but a shape you are, and a shape does not leave a man. It waits under the coat. By the end of the first week my distance had come home. By the end of the second, the left stopped saying encouraging things and started, in the small brutal grammar of the pads, saying difficult ones. And under the physical work all through it ran the other work, the work that was the real point because the physical work was never in doubt. We watched Vole. The household had every scrap of footage of him. There was the fights, the training clips, the endless self-shot videos in which a vain man had, without meaning to, filmed a complete confession of how he moved. I watched hours of it, more than the left and the other man did, because reading a fighter was the half of the old trade that had made me an instructor rather than merely an operator, and it woke in me faster than the body did. And what I saw confirmed, in 100 ways, the thing I had read in a single kick on the gate. Damik Vole was very good and entirely knowable. He was a genuine athlete, powerful, fast for his size, with a fearsome kick and 30 years of it in his bones. But he had spent those 30 years being the best man in every room, and a man who is always the best man in the room develops habits he is never punished for, and those habits, laid bare across 100 hours of footage, were a map. The dropped lead hand when he committed to the big kick. There it was again and again. A door he left open every time because no one had ever been fast enough or willing enough to walk through it. The way his weight settled a half beat before he threw, a loading he could not feel and I could see. His temper, the specific way his technique got sloppier and bigger and more predictable the more frustrated he became, because his whole method was built on breaking men early, and he had never learned what to do with a man who did not break. And above all, the thing at the root of all of it, he did not know how to fight a man who would not fight him. Every opponent in every clip came forward, met him, traded, tried to win. He had no footage of himself anywhere against a man who simply refused to be there when the blow arrived and refused, in turn, to give him a target for his frustration to fix on. Because such men do not exist in his world. They exist in mine. He's going to lose his mind, I told the left on the 14th day, watching a clip of Vole batter a game, overmatched challenger into the ropes. Not his fight, his mind. Watch, he needs the other man to give him something. A trade, a stumble, a face he can read. If you give him nothing, he doesn't get calmer. He gets bigger, asterisk, sloppier. He starts reaching. He starts leaving that hand. I tapped the frozen screen where Vole's lead hand hung open at his hip. The whole thing is, don't give him anything to break. Make him swing at Fogg. He'll do the rest to himself. I won't have to hurt him. He'll spend himself hunting a man who isn't where he thinks, and by the end he'll be so far behind on control and so lit up with frustration that even he will be able to count it. The left looked at me for a long moment. You've already fought it, he said. In your head, it's already over. It was over on the gate, I said. This is just the part where the rest of them find out. That was the confidence, and it was earned. And I set it down here plainly because what happened next is what makes a story out of a certainty, and I would not want you to think the certainty was wrong. It was not wrong. But there is a difference between knowing you will win a fight and knowing what it will cost, and there was a thing I had not counted, and it found me 4 days before the date in the bare room at the worst possible moment. It was the leg. Not the bruise had long healed, yellowed and gone. It was older than the bruise. In the hill country, in the matter the broad man had declined to describe, I had taken an injury to the left knee that the depot surgeons had rebuilt as well as such things can be rebuilt, which is to say well enough for a man to stand a gait on for 11 years and not well enough for a man to fight on. I had known this. I had, if I am honest, been carrying it as a quiet fact all through the training, the way you carry the knowledge of a step that will one day be too much, and telling myself that the fight I meant to have, the Fogg fight, the make him swing at nothing fight, did not need the knee, because it was a fight of distance and refusal and small economical movement, and not of the explosive base a real war would demand. Then, on the 4th to last day, the left, doing his job, which was to find every crack before Vole could, pressed me into exactly the kind of exchange I had promised myself I would never be in, cornered me, took away my distance, made me plant and drive off the left leg to escape, and the knee went. Not badly. It did not tear, it did not drop me. But it spoke, a bright sick lance of it up the outside of the joint, and I felt the base go soft under me for a half-second. And the left, who missed nothing, saw the base go soft and stopped instantly and stepped back and looked at me with a new and careful stillness. "How long have you been fighting on that?" he said. 11 years, I said. "It's old, it's fine for what I need." "It's fine for the fight you're planning," he said slowly. "It's not fine for the fight he'll try to make." He crouched, unasked, and put his hands on the knee the way the sergeant had put his fingers on the bruise, reading it, and his face when he stood was not encouraging. "Here's the truth because you'd give me the truth. Your plan is right. Give him Fogg, make him swing at nothing. Let him beat himself on the scoring if it goes that way. The knee never matters, you're barely moving. But you don't get to choose alone how it goes. He gets a vote. And the one thing a man like that does when he can't find you is he stops trying to find you and starts trying to maul you. He'll bull in. He'll close the distance. He'll try to make it a wrestle in the corner where skill matters less and mass matters more. And if he does that, you have exactly 2 ways out. You plant and drive, which is this. He touched the knee, or you take the mauling. And if the knee's like this, you can't plant and drive. Which means if he's smart enough to make it ugly, you're fighting the last minute of that round on one leg, in a corner, against a man who weighs what he weighs. He let that stand. You still win. You're better than him on one leg, but it stops being a lesson and starts being a survival, and survival's ugly, and ugly's exactly what the palace can't afford. He was right, and I knew he was right, and it was the thing I had not counted. I sat with it that night in the bare room in the cot, with the knee packed in ice and the whole clean certainty of the last fortnight complicated by 4 inches of old cartilage. And I understood the shape of what I had signed up for in a way I had not, quite, understood it before. I had promised the prince a lesson, not a beating, a man walking out whole, a loss so gentle no one could call it cruelty. I had built that promise on a fight I could control absolutely. And now I knew that I could not, quite, control it absolutely. That there was a version, the ugly version, that Vole could force if he were smarter and colder than his footage suggested. And that in the ugly version I would still win, but the winning would not be the thing I had promised. It would be an old wounded soldier hanging on, and that story helps no one. I could have told them. I could have gone to Corvin the next morning and said, "My knee is not sound, find another man." And there was no other man wearing the coat, but there were other men, and the household could have found one and started again. And no one would ever have known why I stepped aside. I did not tell them, and I want to be honest about why, because it was not entirely honor. Part of it was honor. The coat had been insulted, and I was the one who had been kicked, and it was mine to answer. And handing it to another man felt like handing him a debt of mine to pay. But part of it, the truer part, was something the broad man had seen in me and named without naming. I wanted it. The banked thing that had opened one eye when the second kick landed had, over a fortnight of the bare room, come fully awake, and it did not want to be told the fight would go to someone else. It had been asleep for 11 years, and it was awake now, and it wanted, the way a thing wants that has been denied its whole nature, to be let off the leash once, cleanly, in a good cause, in front of everyone, and to prove to Vole, to the 4 million, to the comments defending an idea they did not understand, and I will admit it to myself, that the coat had never been hollow, that the 11 years of stillness had been a discipline and not a burial. So I did not tell them about the knee. I told the left only that it was old and it was fine and he should stop worrying, and he looked at me in a way that said he did not believe me and would say nothing, because he was of my kind, and my kind does not carry another man's decision to the officers. And I changed my plan, quietly, alone, in the cot, in the dark. The new plan had one addition. It was not enough now merely to give Vole fog and let him beat himself, because the ugly version, the maul, the corner, the wrestle where mass beats skill and my knee betrays me, was a real thing he might stumble into, and I could not afford to fight the last minute of the round on one leg. So the fight could not be allowed to reach a last minute. I could not let it become a war of attrition across the full round, waiting for the scoring to accumulate. I had to end his belief early, not hurt him, never that, but break the thing inside him that made him come forward, so decisively, and so soon that he would spend the rest of the round not mauling but stunned, not hunting but understanding. I had to make him quit trying before his frustration turned smart enough to make it ugly. There is a way to do that. It is the hardest thing my old trade taught and the rarest, and it has nothing to do with striking. It is the thing you do to a man's certainty rather than his body. I had done it before, long ago, in rooms I will not describe, to men who meant me far more harm than Damick Vole ever would. I had never once imagined doing it in a lit ring in front of a nation, wearing the king's coat, to a vain kickboxer, as a mercy. But that was the plan now. Break his certainty, not his body, early so the knee never has to answer, and walk him out whole. 4 days. I iced the knee and I told no one, and I waited for the date. The great hall on the night of the exhibition held a sound I had never stood inside before. I had stood inside crowds, the forecourt on a state day, the press of tourists, the roar of a parade. But those crowds were watching a thing happen to the palace, a spectacle the household performed. This crowd was watching a thing happen between 2 men, and one of the men was me, and the sound it made was different in kind. Hungry, taut, wound up over 3 weeks of a story it thought it knew. Some thousands in the seats, banked up into the dark, and beyond them I was told, a number of people watching on their screens that I declined to be told the size of because the size of it did not help me and the seam in the wall part of my mind needed the world small. They had built the ring in the center, not a boxing ring but a matted square, roped, lit hard from above so the fighters would be visible from the last row and every screen. Around it the machinery of a sanctioned bout. The referee's men, the medical station with its 2 doctors and its bench and its bag, the officials at their table, the neutral corner and the 2 working corners. And in the front rows, quiet in the hard light, the household. Not the king. The king does not attend a spectacle, and everyone understood that his absence was not distance but dignity, but Crown Prince Rowan, plain-faced and still, and the gray master of the guard beside him, and among the household's people, unremarkable in a good coat, the broad man with the coast-taken face, whom no one in that hall knew and who watched me warm in my corner the way a man watches a thing he built be tested. Vole came in first. Of course he did. He had negotiated it, the star's entrance, the last in. He came in the way he did everything, as a procession, the black-jacketed entourage, the snarling animal on the chest, the music, the fists raised to a crowd he expected to be his and which gave him, instead, a sound with 2 grains in it. Cheers, yes, from those who love a champion and a spectacle. But under the cheers, an edge, a booing thread from the rows who had watched the gate video and not forgotten it, and Vole heard the edge and it puzzled him, because he had spent 3 weeks telling himself the crowd would come around once they saw him fight, and here they were and they had not come around, and it put, for the first time, a small crack in the certainty I had watched across 100 hours of footage. He was magnificent to look at. I will grant him that fully. Stripped to the waist, oiled by the lights, 30 years of a hard trade laid over him in muscle and old scar, he looked exactly like what he was, a genuine and formidable fighter, a man who had earned every bit of his fame in blood and work, and who had every reason on earth to believe that the ceremonial ornament across the ring from him was about to be exposed. He worked the crowd, the ropes, the camera. He pointed at me and said something the microphones caught and the crowd half heard and half invented, and it was some version of asterisk the statue, and watch this, and I told you asterisk, the same song he had been singing for 3 weeks, and he sang it well, and I let it wash past me and put my eyes on a seam. Then it was my turn, and I want to tell you exactly how I came in, because it was the first move of the fight and it was made before either of us touched. I did not come in as a procession, I came in alone. The household had offered me a corner team, cornermen, a walk, all the apparatus a fighter is entitled to, and I had taken the medical and the cornermen the rules required and refused the rest. I walked out of the tunnel alone, in the plain kit the exhibition allowed, and I did not raise my fists, and I did not look at the crowd, and I did not answer Vole's pointing or his song. I walked to my corner the way I walked to a gate, level, unhurried, eyes forward, a man arriving at a post. No music had been chosen for me and I had asked for none, and so I came into that vast wound-up sound in something close to silence, and the silence traveled with me, because a crowd primed for a spectacle does not know what to do with a man who declines to perform, and it went quiet around me the way it had gone quiet on the forecourt when Vole first kicked and the laughter turned. I felt the room change as I crossed it. I want to be exact. Nothing had happened, no blow, no word, and yet the room changed, because a crowd reads a man's carriage before it reads anything else, and the carriage I carried into that ring was not the carriage of a man who was about to be exposed. It was the carriage of a man arriving at work. Vole, across the ring, felt it too. I watched him feel it. He had built his whole 3-week story on the statue being hollow, and here came the statue, and the statue did not walk like a hollow thing. It put a second crack in the certainty, and I saw it land, and I filed it, and I climbed into my corner and stood and waited and gave the crowd, and Vole, and the 4 million, nothing to look at but a man being still. The referee brought us to the center. He was old and square and unbribable, a former champion whose reputation was the whole reason both sides had accepted him, and he gave us the instructions in a low, flat voice that neither favored nor feared either man. Control, skill, points for dominance, points off for harm. He is empowered to stop this at any moment, and his stop is final. Touch if you'll touch and go to your corners. Vole did not touch. He leaned in instead, close, into my space the way he had leaned over the chain on the gate, and he said, low, under the referee's voice, meant only for me, "I'm going to take you apart slow, statue, so they all see there was never anything in the coat." His breath was mint again. His eyes above the grin were flat and working, the fighting eyes, and I understood that he meant every word and believed every word and had no more idea than a child what he was looking at. I looked back at him, and I did the one thing in that whole night that was, I suppose, a small cruelty, and I did it deliberately, because it was the first strike of the fight of certainties, and it needed to land before a single blow was thrown. I smiled. Not a taunt, not a champion snarl. A small, quiet, genuine smile, the smile of a man who knows something the other man does not and is sorry for him, and is going to teach him anyway. It was the smile you give a young soldier who has just told you, with total confidence, a thing about a battlefield that he is about to learn is wrong. It held no anger and no fear and no performance, and that was exactly what made it land, because Vole had faced 100 men's snarls and fears, and never once, in 30 years, faced a man across a ring who looked at him the way you look at a boy who is about to be gently, thoroughly corrected. It was the first thing in 3 weeks I had said to him, and I said it without a word, and I watched the third crack open in the certainty, wider than the first two, wide enough that behind the fighting eyes something looked out for a half-second that was not certainty at all. Then we went to our corners, and the bell rang, and Damick Vole came to take the statue apart and found Fogg. He led, as I knew he would, with the leg. It was his signature and his glory and the very kick he had thrown on the gate, the low roundhouse to the outside of the lead thigh, the leg killer, the opener that had dropped 100 men into the range he wanted them. He threw it hard and fast and beautifully off the bell, straight at the meat of my forward leg, the same leg, almost the same target as the forecourt, and there was a rightness in that for him, a closing of the circle. I'll start where I started. It hit nothing. I was not there, not dramatically. I did not leap or dodge or make a show of it. I simply was not where the kick expected the leg to be, because I had read the load in his hip a half-beat before he threw, the same load I had watched 100 times on the footage and once on the gate, and I had taken the leg back and offline by exactly the distance the kick needed and no more, so that the beautiful heavy roundhouse swept through the air where my thigh had been, and met nothing at all, and carried Vole a quarter turn past his own balance. And as it swept through and he was, for that quarter second, overcommitted and open, his lead hand dropped the door he always left open, the door no one had ever walked through, and I did not walk through it. I let it stand open. I let him recover. I gave him nothing to feel except the strange, disorienting nothing of a kick that hit Fogg and a guard that could have punished him and chose not to. He reset, and I watched him reset, and I watched him decide it was a fluke. He threw it again. The same kick, harder. I was not there again. This time I let the miss turn him a little further, let him feel a little more of the wrongness of it, and again the hand dropped, and again I declined the open door, and again I gave him nothing to read, no counter, no flinch, no face, no target for the fury that a missed signature kick begins in a man like that to build. Twice now his best thing had met air. Twice now the door had stood open and nothing had come through it. And a man who has built his whole method on breaking men early was, 40 seconds into a single round, beginning to understand that he could not find the man he had come to break. I want to describe what I was actually doing, because from the outside it looked like almost nothing, and the almost nothing was the entire art. I was managing distance. That was all. That was everything. Every fight, every real one, in a ring or a room, is decided by the science of the gap between two men, and the man who owns the gap owns the fight, and I had owned the gap since the load in his first hip told me he still moved exactly the way the footage said. I stayed in the one place Vole could not use, close enough that he could not wind up his big weapons without me reading the wind up, far enough that his short weapons could not reach, and mobile enough. On a knee I was praying he would not force me to plant, that the place kept moving with him so that everywhere he looked to set his feet and load his hip, The gap had already changed, and the man he wanted to hit had already become fog. I did not strike him. I want that understood through the whole of it. Blow for blow, in that first minute I threw nothing at all. I did not need to. I was not fighting his body. I was fighting the thing behind the fighting eyes, the certainty, and you do not break a certainty with a punch. You break it with a minute of a man's very best meeting nothing, and nothing, and nothing, in front of everyone he wanted to prove it to. He changed. Right on schedule, exactly as I had told the left he would, Damon Vole stopped throwing his best and started throwing more. The kicks came faster and wider and less clean, the frustration bleeding the science out of them, the technique getting bigger and looser and more predictable the way it always did in the footage when a fight would not break his way. He began to reach. He began to chase. He began, 40 seconds in, to fight not the fight he had trained for but the fight his temper wanted, which was the fight I wanted, which was no fight at all. A big, frustrated man swinging at a place, a still man had already left. And then he did the smart thing, the one thing I had feared, and I felt the knee wake as he did it. He stopped chasing the fog. Some old fighter's instinct under the fury told him what the left had told me, that you cannot hit a man who owns the distance by reaching for him, that the only answer to fog is to take the distance away entirely, and Vole stopped throwing and bulled asterisk. He put his head down and his weight forward and he came in, all of his mass, to close the gap and pin me and make it the ugly wrestle in the corner where his weight would beat my skill and my knee would have to plant and drive to escape or take the mauling. It was the ugly version. It was the version I could not afford. It was the corner and the plant and the sick lance up the outside of the joint, 4 days healed and not healed at all, and he came in fast and heavy and smart, and behind me close were the ropes. This is the moment. Everything before it was the setup. Here is where the fight of certainties was won or lost, on a knee that could not do the thing the mauling would demand of it. I did not plant, I did not drive, I did not take the mauling. I did the hard thing, the rare thing, the thing my old trade taught last because it is taught to no one who has not mastered everything before it. As Vole's whole mass committed forward to pin a man in a corner, I stopped being the wall the mass was aimed at. I turned with it instead of against it, a small, precise whole-body turn off the asterisk right asterisk leg, the sound leg, the good knee, using the very momentum of his charge, so that all of Vole's weight, all of that trained and furious mass, arrived exactly where I had been and found again fog, and carried him under his own power past me and into the ropes I had been standing in front of a half-second before. I did not throw him. I did not trip him. I did not touch him hard enough for the referee's flat eye to find a single point of harm in it. I simply was not the wall. And a man who has thrown his entire mass at a wall and finds no wall goes where his mass was going, which was into the ropes, and Vole hit them chest first with the whole of his own force and rebounded off them, off balance, spun half around, and for 1 full second stood in the center of that ring with his back to me and his hands down, and his certainty in pieces on the mat, utterly, completely, at the mercy of a man he had come to expose. A man who was standing behind him, unhurried, having thrown not one blow, watching. I could have ended him there. Every man in that hall who understood fighting knew it in the same instant, and the sound they made was the sound of 1,000 people understanding it at once, a low, sharp, indrawn breath, the sound of a crowd watching a thing they had thought was a spectacle become, without warning and execution stayed. Vole's back was to me. His hands were down. His base was gone. He was, in the language of my old trade, finished. The fight was over, decided, his to lose from the moment his mass met fog. And there is a version of that second in which the man behind him closes it, cleanly and terribly, and the crowd screams and the video is glorious, and the statue is proven and Damon Vole is carried out. I did not close it. I stepped back. I let him find the ropes and his feet and his balance. I gave him the second he needed to turn around and be a man again, and I gave it to him openly in front of everyone, so that there was no mistaking what it was, not a missed chance but a granted one, not weakness but mercy, the deliberate, visible, devastating mercy of a man who could have ended it and chose, in front of a nation, to let his enemy keep his feet. And when Damok Vole finished turning around and found me standing there, unhurried, having refused the opening the whole hall had seen, the last of the certainty went out of his eyes, and what came into them instead was the thing I had come to put there, which was not fear and not pain but understanding. The full, sick, total understanding of a man who has just learned, in the space of 1 minute and one granted mercy, that he had never for a single instant been in a fight. That the statue was not hollow, that he had walked across a river and across 3 weeks, and across a signed contract to kick a man who could have taken him apart at his leisure, and had chosen instead to teach him gently in front of everyone he had wanted to impress. The bell had not rung. There was most of a round left, but the fight, the real fight, the fight of certainties was over, and everyone in that hall knew it, and no one knew it more completely than Damok Vole. What a man does with the rest of a round he has already lost tells you more about him than the losing. I have known men who, in Vole's place, would have gone mad, thrown themselves forward in a blind fury to erase the humiliation, swung wilder and wilder in the hope of one lucky blow that would let them tell themselves a different story afterward. And I had planned for that, because the ugly version was still available to him even now, still one furious bull rush from becoming the corner and the plant and the knee. So when Vole squared up again and I read his weight, I read it carefully, ready. He did not rush, and in not rushing, Damok Vole did the first admirable thing I ever saw him do. He came forward, yes. He had too much pride to stand still and be scored on, and too much of a fighter's honesty to quit outright in front of a nation. But he came forward now with something new in him, something that had not been there in a single frame of the 100 hours of footage. He came forward studying. The certainty was gone, and in its place, dawning, was the thing that made him a real fighter under all the noise, curiosity. He had met a wall that was not a wall and a fog that was not fog and a mercy he could not explain, and the part of him that had spent 30 years learning wanted now to understand it. He threw a kick, a real one, controlled, a asterisk question rather than a weapon, and watched, genuinely watched, how the fog moved around it. He feinted and watched. He probed the distance I owned, testing its edges, learning its shape, and I let him learn a little, because a man who is learning is a man who is being taught, and teaching was the whole point. For the rest of that round, we did a thing I do not think either of us could have predicted at the bell. We did not fight. We did something closer to a conversation, conducted in the grammar of 2 bodies, one asking and one answering, Vole probing, testing, reaching for the science of the gap he had never had to understand because he had always been able to simply overpower it, and I showing him, blow by declined blow, exactly why he could not find me. I struck him 3 times in that round. Only 3. Each one landed clean, and each one was pulled to a tap, a gloved touch to the jaw as his kick swept past, a flat palm to the chest as he overreached, a light check of the lead leg that turned his base without hurting it, and each one said the same thing in the language he could finally hear. There. That's where you were open, I could have. I didn't. 3 taps. 3 doors opened and refused. And with each one the last of the crowd that had cheered him at his entrance went silent and then went to me. Because a crowd that came to watch a champion expose a fraud will forgive being wrong, but it will love watching a fraud discover he was the one exposed, and gently, and by a better man. The referee let it run because there was nothing to stop. No harm was being done. In a bout scored on control and skill, one man was demonstrating both in a way the old champion in the striped shirt had perhaps never seen, and the other was, visibly, learning, and there was a strange and unrepeatable beauty in it that the whole hall felt and no one had come expecting. It was not a beating. It was the opposite of a beating. It was the single most one-sided contest most of those thousands had ever witnessed, and not one drop of it was cruel, and that That impossible combination was the lesson, made flesh, in a lit ring, in front of everyone Damok Vole had wanted to prove himself to. The bell rang. I stepped back to my corner and stood the way I stand a gate. Across the ring, Vole stood in his, and he was breathing hard and he was unmarked. I had promised the prince he would walk out whole, and he was whole, not a bruise on him worth the name. 3 taps and a lot of mist air the sum of what my hands had done to his body. And he was looking at me across the mat with an expression I had never once seen on his face in all the footage, an expression that had no performance in it at all. The officials conferred, but it was a formality and everyone knew it. There was nothing to score. One man had controlled every second of the round without ever landing a blow that hurt, and had, on top of it, twice held a finished fight in his hand and set it down. The other had not landed a single meaningful strike and had spent the last 2 minutes learning why he never would. The old referee did not even wait for the cards. He walked to the center and he raised my hand, the guardsman's hand, the coat's hand. The hand of the statue Vole had come to prove was hollow. And the hall came up out of its seats in a sound I will not try to describe except to say that it was not the hungry sound they had come in with. It was a bigger, cleaner, warmer sound. The sound of thousands of people who had watched something they did not know they needed to see and had been, all of them, quietly moved by it. And then Damok Vole did the second admirable thing, and it was the one that mattered, and it was the one that finished the story the right way. He crossed the ring to me. The referee had raised my hand and the crowd was roaring, and Vole crossed the mat. And for one bad half-second the old instinct in me, and I think, in the broad man watching from the front row, wondered whether the humiliation had turned in him after all, whether he was coming to salvage his pride with one last mad thing. He was not. He stopped in front of me close, in the space where he had leaned to promise he would take me apart slow, and he looked at me, and the flat working fighting eyes were gone entirely, and what was left was just a man, 40-odd and famous, and for the first time in a very long time honest. "What are you?" he said, quietly, only for me the way the threat had been only for me, not who, what. And I gave him the only answer I was permitted to give, the answer the palace and the broad man and I had agreed on, the answer that kept the company where the company lives, and I gave it to him plainly, because he had earned a true sentence even if he could not have all of it. "A guardsman of the king's household," I said, "same as I was on the gate. There was never anything else in the coat. That's the whole point. You didn't kick an ornament. You kicked a man who decided not to react, and there's a difference between a man who can't and a man who won't, and you spent 3 weeks unable to imagine it. I let that stand a moment. You're a good fighter, better than you fought tonight, because tonight you fought a thing you'd never met. Learn from it and you'll be dangerous. Don't, and you'll spend the rest of your life kicking statues to find out if they're hollow." I put out my gloved hand. "Most of them are. This one wasn't. That's all this was." He looked at the hand for a long moment. And then Damok Vole, the loud man, the procession, the 4 million, the snarling animal over the heart, took it, and gripped it, and did the thing that no one in that hall or on any of the screens had thought they would ever see, the thing that turned the whole 3 weeks from a grudge into something better. He lowered his head, the shaved shining head he had held so high on my forecourt, and he inclined it to me, a small deliberate bow, the bow of one fighter to a plainly greater one, given in full view of everyone he had wanted to impress, and he said, loud enough this time for the microphones to catch it and for the 4 million to hear, "I came to prove there was nothing in the coat." He straightened. His voice did not shake, and it was the better for not shaking. "I was wrong. I've been beaten before. I've never been taught before, and I've never been taught by a man who could have hurt me a dozen times and didn't once. Whatever's in that coat," he looked at me, "it's more than I've got, and I'm the one who found that out the hard way in front of all of you, and I earned every second of it." He turned to the crowd, and he did the last thing, the thing that finished it. He raised my hand himself, the guardsman's hand, the statue's hand, and held it up, and let the hall roar for the man he had come to break. That is the moment they play now when they play it. Not the kick on the gate, not the fog and the ropes and the finished fight I set down. That the champion's own hand raising the guardsman's, the head bowed. The I was wrong, that is the thing the country kept. There is not much more, and what there is, I will tell plainly, because the honest resolution of a thing is owed the same discipline as the thing itself. I did not become famous. That was the whole design, and it held. To the country I was and remained, a guardsman of the king's household, the still man who turned out, when a champion forced the question, to be no ornament at all. That was the lesson the household had needed taught, and it was taught perfectly, and its perfection was precisely that it was about the coat and not the man. The 4,000,000 learned that the guard on the gate is not hollow. They did not learn about the Sable Company, or the depot, or the syllabus the rest of them learned from, or the matter in the hill country, or the knee. The broad man with the coast-taken face saw to that with the same quiet thoroughness he saw to everything, and I never learned his name, and I never asked. The knee held. It is worth saying, because I had spent 4 days afraid it would not, and had built the whole fight around never asking it the one question it could not answer. In the end I never had to plant and drive on it, because I broke Vole's certainty before he was smart enough to force them all, exactly as I had planned, and the turn off the ropes that ended it came off the sound leg. The left found me afterward in the tunnel and looked at me and looked at the knee and said only, you knew going in it might not hold, and you built a fight it never had to. It was not quite a question. I did not quite answer it. He nodded once, my kind to my kind, and that was the whole of it. Crown Prince Rowan came down to the tunnel, which he did not have to do. He found me there out of the lights, and he did not offer his hand for a photograph or a word for a camera, because there were no cameras there, and that was why he had come. He looked at me a moment, at the plain kit, at the man who was already, visibly, packing the fighter back down under the coat where it lived. You could have ended it in the first minute, he said. We all saw it. He had his back to you. Ending it wasn't the job, Your Highness. No, a faint, real smile. You told me that 3 weeks ago in almost those words, and I didn't fully understand you until tonight. You said it had to be a lesson and not a beating, and I nodded, and I thought I knew what you meant, and I didn't. Not until I watched you set down a finished fight in front of a nation so that a vain man could keep his feet and learn something instead of losing something. He was quiet a moment. That's a harder thing than winning. I'll not forget you did it. And I'll not forget, he added lower, what it cost you to spend the quiet you'd built. You can have it back now. It's yours. The gate's yours, as long as you want it. That's all I want, Your Highness. I believe you, he said, and I think he did, and he understood it too, which is rarer. There's a kind of man who wants the quiet because he's never known anything else, and there's a kind who wants it because he's known the other thing and chosen against it. You're the second kind. Those are the men I want on my father's gates. He put out his hand then, not for a camera, there was none, just a man to a man, and I took it. Go home, Corporal, ice the knee, a glint. I'm told it's old. It's fine, Your Highness, I said, and he laughed once quietly and went back up to the lights, and I went home. I stood the north gate again 3 days later. It was a bright, hard morning, the cobblestones cool, the crowd thin and growing, the same as any morning. I took my post, and I found the seam in the far wall, the particular seam, chosen my first week, kept 11 winters and now 12, and I put my eyes on it and let the world happen at the edges. And the world happened. The tourists came and leaned on the line and held their breath and waited for the flicker that would not arrive. And when it did not arrive they laughed and stepped back satisfied, the same as ever, because the pillar had held. But something was different, and it stayed different, and it is the truest thing I have to leave you with. The people who came to the gate now looked at me differently. Not all of them knew. Most of them had never seen the video. Most of them were tourists from far away who had come to test the famous statue the way tourists always do. But enough of them knew. Enough of them had watched a champion cross a river to prove the coat was hollow, and had watched the coat teach him, gently, that it was not, and those ones did not lean on the line and hold their breath and test me. Those ones stopped a little way off, and they looked, and there was in the looking a thing that had not been there before, which I can only call knowing. The knowledge that the stillness was not emptiness, had never been emptiness, that the man who does not move is not a man who cannot but a man who has decided, over and over morning after morning, that the not moving is the discipline, and the discipline is the point. They understood, in a word, the thing the comments under the video had been reaching for without knowing they were right. That man is standing for something you'll never understand. They had understood it now, some of them, because a loud man had kicked a still one and been taught the difference between a man who cannot and a man who will not, in a lit ring in front of everyone without a drop of cruelty in it. Damik Vole, I am told, went home changed. He did not vanish, men like him do not vanish, but the videos changed. The whole snarling animal register of them softened into something a little truer, and there is a clip, one of the last before I stopped being told about such things, in which someone asks him about the guard, the statue, the man he fought, and expects plainly the old grudge. And Vole does not give it to them. He is quiet for a moment, and then he says a thing I did not expect and have kept. You want to know the hardest man I ever met? He never threw a punch at me. He stood still while I kicked him twice, and he never moved, and 3 weeks later I found out why. Some men are hard because they hit you. That one was hard because he didn't have to. I never saw him again. I did not need to. He had learned the thing which was the whole of what the household set out to teach, and I had kept the company where it lives, which was the whole of what I had asked, and the coat was answered, and the gate was mine, and the knee, whatever the prince liked to joke, was fine. That is what happened next in the end, after the martial arts champion kicked a royal guard. He never expected it. Neither did the 4 million. And I will tell you the last true thing, the thing I understood standing the gate that bright cool morning with the tourists laughing at the pillar that held. I had spent 11 winters teaching no one anything, or so the broad man had said, and he had been wrong. I had been teaching the whole time. I had been teaching the one lesson the gate exists to teach, morning after morning, to everyone who came to test it. That discipline is not the absence of the storm but the mastery of it. That the man who does not move is the strongest man in the square precisely because he has chosen not to move and could choose otherwise. That stillness, real stillness, is not what a man does when he has nothing in him. It is what a man does when he has everything in him and holds it, and lets it go only when honor asks, and not 1 second before. The crowd leaned on the line and held its breath. I put my eyes on the seam in the far wall. I did not move.